deck that they're going to replace.
All meetings are special.
That's somebody leaving, I think. Yeah.
Like it's like all right, I will
Here.
okay, item 2 on the agenda is approval or amendment of the agenda. Any amendments or changes to be made? All right, seeing none, that'll be approved by acclamation. We only have one item on the agenda today, and that's item 3, which is new business and the continued review of request for proposals of the compensation pay structure job audit and benefits study. Who is leading us off?
Recording in progress.
What about now?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, Tangela Bell, HR Manager. So just in continuation from our last meeting, we held 4 interviews with the 4 remaining finalists that we discussed, which were CBiz, AutoSolve, PayPoint HR, and Evergreen. After interviewing and reviewing the firms, the recommendation is to proceed with engaging PayPoint HR for the purposes of our compensation study. Are there any questions that you may have in regard to?
Alderwoman Tice. No, I have questions.
You have questions?
So I have some specific questions, but I have just sort of, before I get into that, so why did you pick them over the others? Like, what in the interviews made them stand out?
So one of the main things that stood out was their ability and willingness to engage our employees as well as the board and the department heads in getting the feedback. Some of the questions that we presented in the interview were related to getting that information from the employees so that they feel included in this whole process, so they feel that their job description accurately represents the jobs that they do when the compensation analyst goes out to get the comparators. That was a big key component for me. There was consideration for the budget. There was consideration for the list of comparators, the willingness to get that information to grow that list if need be.
So, when you look at the 4, we did the interview with the 4, but in our minds, after the interview with AutoSolve, we eliminated them from consideration. The 3, they all offer the same thing. They all use different words to explain the same services that you would get. In terms of casting a wide net for comparators, they all talk about what they would use, the metrics they would use to make a selection on who your comparators were, whether it's demographic, whether it's budget, whether it's full-service city, whether it's average income of your population or average sale value of home, different things like that. None of them mentioned commercial square footage, that they would use that as a basis for selecting comparators. Actually, the consultant that we are recommending this evening had already gone through the exercise of showing some of who they would add as a comparator. And we talked to them about, I think there was a specific question here about the challenges we face with not having the 14 that we currently have, not having a fire department. So how would they approach that? Would they be willing to pool a number of fire districts and, identify them as one comparator group? So they were open to that, but they specifically said they would take their lead from what the Ways and Means Committee wants to do, because, you all would kind of give them direction on who they would like to see. And we talked about some of the other cities that have just done their compensation study and who they're using. A lot of those who we've used as comparators, and then they've added new cities. So they were open to that. Now, PayPoint HR has done limited work in the state. However, they've done work throughout the country. So and we ask specific questions, are you familiar with our labor market? And they've done some research. So bottom line is they can all do the same work. Some are just more expensive than others. And because this is a request for proposal, you're looking at cost. If it was request for qualification, then we would be looking at, okay, are they truly qualified? But at the same time, we were looking at that. So they're all qualified. They all can do it. It's just a matter of cost.
Um, if I remember, PayPoint didn't list a fee for meetings.
They did. I went back to Karen to ask her for that fee, and it was updated. So in addition, if there are any additional meetings that we would need, it would be $1,500 plus travel. Yes.
Um, how many meetings would they do with the employees? Said they were brief sessions. But
It would be one meeting, so that's why you got to plan ahead. So in terms of timeline, and was it in here? I asked Tangela to prepare a timeline so that, we can kind of think through for those who are not in the region. So I think CBIZ is the only one out of the three that we narrowed it down that has a local office. So if they're going to come in, we would plan ahead so that they could have meetings with groups of staff, department directors, Ways and Means Committee, all on the same day. And then certainly with COVID, we're a little bit more prone to have virtual meetings, and they work well. So there will be some virtual meetings embedded in this. And for the most part, that works because the previous consultant, over the years, eventually moved out of state. So we were having a lot of phone conversations, Zoom meetings with her, and that worked well. So the fact that they're not local does not present a problem for staff.
But just, I mean, unless it gets away from us, please open forum.
So my first question is on the comparators. Did they indicate numbers of comparators? I guess did they indicate a willingness to do additional?
However many the city wants. It could be 20.
Okay, and then it appeared, now they had a really interesting example of a company that they had done. It looked, maybe it's a nursing home but like, would all the comparators be other cities?
Yes.
Okay, so they won't do like a job category. They
No,
would just
they
do-
would be cities,
Okay.
and they would be, in addition, what I just mentioned, and they're going to take their lead. They're going to make a recommendation, but then they'll take input from Ways and Means and from staff. And so there are two cities that have just completed their compensation study, City of Clayton and City of Kirkwood. I believe they have 20. And so I would share that with Ways and Means so that prior to the consultant coming in, you all would take a look at that and see whether, use it as a guide, to determine who is missing from this list that needs to be added. And they're the same cities that are there now, but you now have St. Peter's, you have O'Fallon, Missouri, Wentzville, and then those 3 or 4 fire districts that are grouped together to form one comparator group.
Okay, so then my next question is about standard deviation. This was a company that does use standard deviation, and the prior consultant seemed to like do a curve, and we just like dropped the top and the bottom, but it wasn't really a statistically significant set of group, it's of other comparators. So did you talk to them about how they use standard deviation and?
They are willing to use, they will offer a number of options. So some of them even use regression analysis. So and we indicated that there is a desire not to use standard deviation. And so they were open to that. I think one of the partners at the firm has a PhD, is it in math? Or they call him a rocket scientist. So a lot of them have. I know, right here. But, a lot of them have people with those kind of expertise. with the firm. So if we absolutely do not want to use standard deviation, it's not do or die.
Well, I'm not saying that we don't necessarily want to use it, but I think that,
Oh, I've heard we don't.
well,
From some, but
I think
not
we've
all.
heard that from some, but I
Oh,
also
okay.
think that if it's, and I, despite my education, I'm not this huge math whiz, but like there probably is a reasonable way to use standard deviation, and I'm not sure that with a group of either 8 or 14, just randomly eliminating the ones on each end
Right.
is truly standard deviation. And so I
think-
think if it's an actual mathematical way that we could agree on, then that's okay, but I just wondered if they were like set.
No.
This is
And I think that could be a discussion for the committee and for the board. And if you all are open to including this new comparator group, then that would resolve the issues we were having before.
right. And so one of the things they had done is reclassify job. They had like a triangle thing, and they had reclassified jobs. Presumably, they would spend time with our positions and really look at what the classifications are
I think that's important.
internally. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Then there was something about their proposed salary schedule and that it would change with the CPI. So like their recommendation would be to change with the CPI. Is that sort of a standard recommendation that they have? Do you know? Did you talk about that?
When we ask the question, how do we stay current? They would offer a proposal to help us stay current. And it could be building in the CPI every year or other options.
Okay.
So there, it's a combination. It's not just what we have now, which is one flat schedule. And then until we do it again, they would give us tools, which they say is free, to update it on a yearly basis.
Because that's really critical, because I feel like we always fall behind, but particularly
Yes.
this last
Right.
couple years we fell behind. So I've got questions from another member of our board. Yeah, so it was back to the standard deviation that we don't want a formula that artificially lowers our collective comparisons when we have the philosophy to be near the top of the payment scale. So we don't want to do something that sort of eliminates that. So, my questions.
Yeah, I want to just make sure that at least I'm clear on my position on whether or not we include standard deviation, whether or not we have philosophy scales from 75th to 95th. Those are things that I think we need to have the consultant be able to provide us with that's why we're hiring them, all right? And if standard deviation with the right amount of comparators and the right amount of statistical data is the way, the industry standard, then I think we need to make some sense of that. I think the issue that we've had is that we do this, we've only been doing this every other year, and that's why we end up sliding, right? And so there's a number of factors that cause us to fall behind. I don't think standard deviation was the one killer pill that says, oh, yep, that screws us over, right? So I think we just need to be careful about how we're dictating what they do with their job, because I want them to provide us with their appropriate consultation and recommendation.
That they intend to have with you all about methodology. And if the agreement is to go forward with them, actually, we think they were the most prepared in the interview. They came with a PowerPoint presentation. None of the others did. And really walked us through it. Their whole discussion about methodology, there's a flow chart for this. They want to seek your input. Very matter of fact, we don't, because we talked a lot about not using standard deviation, and I've talked with individual members of the board where there's a strong position one way or the other on that. So as much as you're a consultant, you want the gig. So you're not going to go before a board and be confrontational. You just,
Yeah, sure.
let's move on.
No, and to that, I think you know, I notice in their response that it would include 75th and 95th for non-uniform
Right.
employees. I think that's still valid. One of the things that we looked at, I believe, last time we did this was a flat across the board 85th percentile as just a comparison, you know, to stay up in there, the highest rung for both non-uniform and uniform. I'm just curious on whether or not that's something that they are going to evaluate again, because the last thing I want to do is put in position again a split percentage, just because, you know, we evaluate it and we think, okay, you know, in order to afford the salaries and the long-term impact of it against our, you know, we're going to have to adopt a different philosophy strategy than 95th across the board. I think we should just have everything on the table, and if that means everybody kind of is a little bit lower, but we can all afford it, I think that's something that we need to evaluate at these points when we have them. So I don't know if that,
Conversation.
And so during our interview, we did have that conversation with each of the firms, and for PayPoint, they are willing to come back if we need anything between 20% and 85th percentile. They will give us that,
Okay.
that recommendation as well if we come back to 95th percentile and the board and the Ways and Means Committee feels that it's not an affordable or economical means to sustain, they can come back and give us that from anywhere from 20 percentile to the 85th percentile as
Okay.
well. So we did ask that
They
question
work
to
with your
them.
budget to.
I just, yeah, I
help
want to make
you
sure that they're flexible enough to, they're
decide
like,
what you can
well,
afford."
you scoped this for this and this. and,
No.
You know, okay.
Kind of change that up because this does not go to the board until the 4th. Initially, Tangela and I were discussing this today, since they're coming from out of town, that maybe we share the timeline, because it would be ideal if they could come to the next Ways and Means meeting. Um, eh, have that meeting with you all, have it with staff while they're in town, so that they're face to face with everyone. But on second thought, I'm not certain if the board's going to agree with your recommendation. So then we might have just set ourselves up by telling them. So we probably don't.
Recommendation.
So we're not going to do that anymore.
My thought would be like, what, time to prep, so we're
That's
ready to
right.
ask
That's
questions.
right.
You know, so that I'm like, well, okay, I mean, looks like you're doing a good job. Carry the one. I mean,
At least in my mind, should be about the methodology. It should be about the agreement on who our comparators are and why. And then whatever else you all want to talk about.
yeah, and I would, you know, I think of that phrase, and I don't want the result to dictate the method. There is, you know, if standard deviation we're gosh, I mean, if we're getting into other methodologies, right one. I mean, I appreciate the extra work that went into this, and
So moved.
Second. Good reading.
I didn't read it all. I'm not, Ron Burgundy altogether. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Call.
Oh, okay. Well,
Tice?
yes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great, motion carries. We don't have anyone in the audience. Is there anyone online who?
Eric's online, but there's no comment from Eric.
Comment from Eric. All right, well, seeing